To-dos. Finally, we've implemented everything there was to implement, and now we can start working on the reorderable to-do list. Let's start with creating new and empty to-dos. Hello, welcome to ResoCoder, where we're getting prepared for real app development so that you will get freelance clients or a job and be confident about the apps you build. So subscribe and hit the bell to join us on our quest for becoming in-demand Flutter developers. In this part of the domain-driven design Flutter tutorial series, we are going to place the first proverbial brick on our path to finishing this app fully, and we're gonna do so by creating this add a to-do button at the bottom of the what is going to be the to-do list, which is going to be reorderable like this. Again, in this part, we are only going to focus on adding a single to-do. We are not even going to display them in the list because there is actually quite a lot of work behind the scenes of what goes into managing this sort of a to-do list. So let's get started immediately. We are going to be operating inside this single child scroll view again, where we already have a body field and a color field. So let's actually jump to the app we are currently building right here. So we currently have only these two fields, and we are also going to add a list here. But for now, we're just going to do with the single add to do button. So let's actually go ahead and create a new file for this add to do tile widget. So right under node form widgets, we are going to right click, create a new file, add to do tile widget .dart. And over here, let's just create a stateless widget with the name add to do tile. All right. Just like that, let's import material.dart and we are good to go. Let's just quickly add this widget to the node form, const add to do tile. Let's import it, and for now we're just going to focus, at least from the start of this part, on the UI or how it looks. So by saying that it's a tile, you probably already have predicted that we are going to use a list style, and you are absolutely correct. So let's just return a list style like this, and this list style's title will be a text, which will say add a to do like this. And then it's going to have a leading icon, just like in the app, which is already finished. And this leading icon will be a plus symbol. So it will be icon, icons at. And as always, you can get this code from the link in the video description. So let's just make this constant, right? Also, this text should be constant. Cool. And actually, to move this whole tile, or at least this leading icon, a bit more from the left and from all of the sides actually, let's wrap this icon inside a padding, and let's say that it's gonna be 12 pixels from all sides. And let's also make the padding constant, and now we can actually remove these two const keywords, because if the parent constructor, so to say, is constant, then the parameters are constant automatically as well. So this is everything when it comes to how the add a to do list style will look like. But now we're getting to more of a core of the problem, what we are trying to solve here, and that is actually adding the empty to do. So we are going to be operating with the node form block. So whenever the list style is tapped, so on tap, we want to get hold of our trusted node form block. So let's say block provider to import Flutter block here. And now we can use just the context extension. So context dot, let's say block. It's of type node form block, right? Let's import it, and we want to add an event to this block, which is going to be from our node form event union, and it's gonna be that todos changed, right? Because after all, we are trying to add a single new to-do to the list of all to-dos, and this todos changed, if we take a look at this, takes in an immutable list, so KT list, of to-do item primitives. All right, so how can we get hold of such to-do item primitives? Well, we cannot just sort of create them here and do something like list of, so create an empty list, and inside of that, once we import kt.dart, just create a new to-do item primitive dot empty, right? This is a class which we have created some while ago, precisely for the use within the block, because blocks, or at least the events of the blocks, do need to operate with data which is simple in nature, which is not validated, because it's precisely inside of the blocks, or inside the value objects which the blocks create, rather, where the validation takes place. And because of that, the parameters of the events need to be simple. They need to have primitive types. They cannot have validated value objects, and that's why we have created this to-do item primitive class, which does not have a validated name, for example. It's just a simple string. We've created this precisely so that it can be passed into the block through an event, right? You can go watch some of the previous parts, for example, the part where we have created the node form block event, to sort of get a more of a refresher of what I have just talked about. But this is the gist of it. Basically, blocks need to take in primitives. And now if we come back to the add to do widget, we cannot just do something like this, because what this would do is that the to-dos would always have just one to do, right? Because we will be constantly updating them to be just a list of a single to-do item primitive, right? After formatting this a bit more so that we can see everything on the screen, now you may object that what we can do actually, instead of doing this, is to maybe have a block builder here, or maybe just get hold of the block again. So doing something like context block, node form block, get the block's state, which is of type node form state. And from this, we can get the node, and we can get the to-dos, right? And sort of somehow add them together, because we have the to-dos which are already present inside of the block state, and we would be able to just add a single new empty to-do item primitive to these already present to-dos, right? Well, this seems like a good solution on paper, or maybe not even on paper, but just on first glance. The problem here is that if you take a look closely, the to-dos which are present inside of the state are obviously already validated, which is precisely what we want. We want to have a list of maximally 3 items, so that is list 3, right? And it's not holding to-do item primitives, instead it's holding validated to-do item entities. This is all good when it comes to the actual state. The problem is that Mixing to-do item primitives and to-dos is just not possible. I mean, what's the point of this? We cannot add them together. We cannot say add an element to the list of 3 items. No, we just need to fully operate with to-do item primitives here while we are in the presentation layer, and we cannot even touch the validated list 3 and to-do item entities. If you think about it, it makes total sense. This is what all of the other widgets are doing. What we are trying to accomplish here is nothing different. For example, if you take this note body field, this text form field operates with a string. It's not validated in any way, shape, or form. It's just a simple string. Then we take this string, put it through an event, of course, through an event called body changed. We put it into the block where it's then validated through a value object. And we want to do precisely the same thing with our to-dos. We need to operate exclusively with a primitive type, which is in this case a KT list of to-do item primitive. And then only inside the block we need to validate it. So in some way, we need to come up with a solution which will enable us to use our to-do item primitives from the UI. We need to be able to manage this KT list of to-do item primitives from multiple widgets actually, because we have this add to-do tile, and then we are also going to have the list view here, from which we will be able to complete a to-do, write some name of the to-do, name here, right? We're gonna need to be able to reorder them. And all of these operations are working with the exact same KT list of to-do item primitives. So how can we make all of these different widgets operate with just one list like this? Well, of course, the answer is to pull the state up and use a provider for everything. We're going to provide the KT list of to-do item primitives down the widget tree to all the widgets which need to use it, right? So let's do just that. Let's go to to-do item presentation classes, which is a file we've created some while ago inside the MISC folder. And we are going to create something which is kind of like a block or a qubit, but it's actually going to be a value notifier. I'm sure that many of you have used it. If not, it's basically like a very simple change notifier, which has just a single value which can be updated. So it's going to be a class which we are going to call form todos, and it's going to extend a value notifier which will have a type of KT list to-do item primitive. So as you can see, we are always just operating with the primitive type, which we need to have access to throughout our whole node form UI basically. Let's import kt.dart, and this needs to have a constructor with a call to super, and we're just going to populate the super constructor with an empty list of to-do item primitives by default once the form to-dos value notifier is created. Now we want to have this value notifier be available throughout the widget tree which needs to use it. So because of that, we are going to go to the node form page, and right above the form, we are going to have a widget change notifier provider. So let's import provider if we can, and we cannot do that, which is unfortunate, so we need to go to pubspec YAML and add a dependency provider. The classic provider, not Riverpod. So let's do just that. Provider goes here. And now we can use it, hopefully. So change notify provider. Yep. And now we need to create. And we're going to create an instance of form todos, which is again just a value notifier, which holds KT list of to-do item primitives. Now we're going to be able to operate with these form to-dos from the add to-do tile, and later on here we are going to create the list, which is going to be reorderable. For now we're just going to ignore it for a few parts, maybe actually just for this part. In the next part we are already going to start implementing the list. Now that these form to-dos are available, let's jump back into the add to-do tile widget and let's actually implement its logic, right? So firstly, we do not want to allow more than, 3 to-dos to be present inside the list of 3, right? And this is all done for us because list of 3 items is actually a validated value object. So if we take a look at the node form blocks state, at the node which is held inside of it, and the list 3 which is held inside of it, we can see that we actually do have a isFull getter on the list 3. And we can use this getter, determining if the list is already full, for enabling or disabling the add to do button. Because of course, if there are already 3 to-dos present, we do not want this button to be enabled. We don't want users to just click it and get a, the error message. Instead, we want to proactively prevent the users from clicking a button if we know that it's just going to create a failure down the line. So that's why we're going to use the enabled property on the list tile. So enabled, and we need to set it in accordance with the list 3's isFull property or getter. So because of that, we actually do need to get hold of the node form block state, which is going to give us the validated value objects contained inside of the edited or newly created node with which the node form operates, right? So we are going to just copy all of this or cut it out. We're going to return a block builder of node form block, node form state. And let's say builder will be returning the list tile, and we can now set the enabled property to be gotten from state dot node dot todos, which is a list of 3 dot is full. And of course, if it is full, we want the list tile to be disabled. So let's negate this thing, right? Now, of course, we also need to sort of change the logic, which is currently completely wrong inside the onTap handler, because this is what I have just used for the example of why we need to have this form todos value notifier, but this logic is actually completely wrong. So sure, we still do want to add a todos changed event, but what's gonna be passed into it is very much different. So again, we want to operate exclusively with primitives inside of the presentation layer. And where are our primitives stored? Well, of course, they are stored inside of the form todos value notifier. So whenever a list tile for adding a to-do is tapped, we first want to edit or update the local state for the presentation layer. So that means that we want to update the form to-dos and add a new empty to-do to them. So we can say provider dot of, let's actually import provider of form to-dos, and let's pass in context, and let's say listen false, so that we don't get exceptions, because if listen is true from an OnTap handler and not from within a build function itself, you're just going to get a bunch of errors. And then we want to get hold of the value, which is of type KT-list to do item primitives, right? And since we are using a immutable KT-list, which is good actually, because immutable data is just easier to handle, and the value equality is basically there by default, so that's why we are using it. But you cannot just add an element like this, like you are used to just a regular list. You can add an element to a list, but you cannot add an element to an immutable list. Instead, you need to reassign the whole list, so we are going to reassign the currently present form to-dos KT list to be a new list with plus element, so one element more, and that element more will of course be a to-do item primitive, which is empty, like this, right? But of course, this is getting completely unreadable. We're going to create an extension on a build context in just a bit, just to make this much more readable. But for now, let's stick with this and finish the logic of the OnTap handler. But basically, after updating the form to-dos, we can now pass these form to-dos to the event, which is going to in turn pass these form to-dos to the block, where they're going to be validated and all that good stuff. So even though it looks horrible with these long chains of calls to the provider and to the value notifier, this is actually code which is correct logically. So let's see actually if after pressing the add a to-do list style 3 times, the list style will be disabled, because it should be, because after we press it for 3 times, the list should be indeed full. It should be validated inside of the block and deemed as full by our logic, which we have written some long time ago. So let's add first to do 1, 2, 3. And as you can see, we can now not click it. It's disabled. So even without printing out anything to the console or seeing the to-do items visually in the UI, we just know that everything is working because it's disabled. The list style is disabled, which means that the list of 3 to-dos is completely full, which is definitely a good thing to know that everything works. We can of course make this block builder a bit more optimized, because currently we are rebuilding this part of UI on every single state change which is coming from the node form block. But of course, as we have gotten used to, we do not need to rebuild everything on every single state change. We can just build this when the previous state P and current state C do not equal in just one property, and that is p.nodes.todos.full or is full, right? So only if the is full property's value changes, so it's not equal to the current value of is full, right? The previous value is not equal to the current value, only then do we need to rebuild this whole list style UI. So again, if we go away from the screen, come back, for example, here, there are already 2 to-dos present, as you can see. So now we should really need to only press this list style once, and it should get disabled immediately. So let's try it. Boom. And it's not working. So why is that? Well, here's the catch. We are nowhere initializing the form to-dos with some sort of already present to-dos. Form to-dos are always created now as an empty list of to-do item primitives. So the to-dos which are already present here do not get taken into the consideration. So how can we initialize form to-dos with the to-dos which are already present in the node we are about to edit? Well, of course, we are going to need to utilize a block listener. So actually, instead of block listener, we can also combine it with the block builder by using a block consumer, as we've already seen. And here we can use listener, which passes as a context and a state. And also we want to listen only when the previous state P and the current state C do not equal in is editing. So P is editing is not equal to C is editing. So basically only when the block is first created and then we initialize it from the node form page right here. And if the edited node is of some value, then we know that we are editing an already existing node, and that's precisely when we do want to run this listener. So what are we gonna do inside of this listener? Well, of course, we are going to get hold of the form to-dos here, of their value actually, like this, and we are going to initialize these to-do item primitives according to the to-dos which are present inside of the validated node entity. So we're going to say that these primitives are equal to state dot node, which is the validated entity, dot to-dos dot value. Now this value can either hold a value failure or the KT list of validated to-do items. So we want to fold the either type. So in case of a failure F, we are actually just going to ignore the failure here and just create a list of to-do item primitive like this. All right. Don't worry, you're going to be able to see everything in just a bit like this. So just an empty list basically, which does not have any items. And in the case that there is a value inside of the list of to-dos, which means we are going to obtain the to-do item list, which is of type KT list, like this. Now we need to convert these domain to-do items, which are validated value objects, or actually they are entities, not value objects, but anyway, they are validated. We need to take them and convert them to the primitives with which we are operating throughout our whole presentation layer for the purposes I've outlined at the beginning of this part. So we need to take this to-do item list, and to convert all of the elements of a list, we are going to map it. Map, oops. And we want to map each and every single element, which we're just going to call an underscore. And we want to convert it to a to-do item primitive. Now, luckily, a while ago, we have already created a to-do item primitive from domain factory constructor, which just simply takes in a to-do item, which is an entity, and then it basically just assigns all of the fields which it can assign simply. And then in the case of the validated to-do name, it's going to attempt to get its string or crash if there is a failure present there. So we can just instantiate a to-do item primitive here from domain and convert the to-do item called underscore. And here we go. We now have a KT list of to-do item primitives here. Awesome. So what this means is that if we now click on this become an in-demand Flutter developer node tile, or how it's called. And now we're going to add a single to-do. This button should be disabled immediately. And sure enough, it is, which is a good thing to see. So again, let's try once more. For example, here, hello there. This thing does not have any to-dos by default, so we need to press add a to-do 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and sure enough, it's disabled. But in the case of become an in-demand Flutter developer, we just hit once and now it's disabled. So we know that everything works. Cool. Now, as I have promised, we are going to quickly but effectively remove all of this mess, because actually we are going to need to access the form to-dos also in the next part, and we definitely do not want to keep on writing this long line of ugly code just to get hold of the value which is present inside our form to-dos value notifier. So because of that, we are going to create an extension on the build context. That's right. So right inside of the misc folder, we are going to create a new file, build context x.dart, x for extension, of course. And over there, we're just going to simply say extension form to-dos x on build context. Let's import build context from, let's say, widgets. That's the most neutral of those packages which we can import. And yeah, so basically, instead of writing this long bit of code, right? Just copy it, this provider of form to-dos context listen follows that value, and we want to have a getter on the build context, which is going to return a kt list of to-do item primitive. The getter will be called form to-dos, and we want to return from here provider of form to-dos blah blah blah. All of this needs to get returned, and the context is of course coming from this as a context, because this is an extension, so this keyword means build context. All right, and then of course we also want to have a setter. So we're gonna have set form to-dos, again needs to be its name, and it's going to accept a single value of kt list to do item primitive. Let's call it value, and we want to reassign these to-dos to the value which is being passed in. All right. So now that we have this nice extension, we can just copy its path, sort of. So at least in VS Code, we can right click and copy relative path. Now we can go into add to do tile widget, say import, paste that path in there. Now, instead of lib, we're gonna say, what are we gonna say actually? Package notes Firebase DDD course, that's the correct thing which we wanna say. All right, and now replace all of the backticks or backslashes with forward slashes. And here we go. We have successfully added an import to which points to our build context extensions, because again, imports for extensions are just not automatically added as of now, which is kind of unfortunate in my book. But anyway, what can we now do is, instead of saying provider of all of this, we can just say context form to-dos, and we are set. So this is what we have replaced here, and we can also replace this thing, and believe it or not, also this thing. Yep. So with all of this horribleness replaced, this code has immediately gotten a new look and a breath of fresh air. It's immediately much more readable. And also we can actually remove the provider import from the add to do tile widget.dart file, because everything which is using provider is now concentrated inside of the extension file. So this has been it for this part, where we have implemented this add to do tile. We've also created the form to do's value notifier, which is responsible for keeping track of the state which is used from within the presentation layer, which, by the way, needs to be the most primitive state possible. It just cannot be validated, because after all, validation needs to happen from the block or from the qubit or whatever else you are using in your application layer. That's because we just simply need to operate with primitives in the presentation layer. Just like text fields operate with strings, we, in this case, need to operate with to-do item primitives, which are not validated. So if you do not want to miss the next part of this series, where we are going to move forward and implement some more of the to-do item reorderable list view, which we are currently creating, be sure to subscribe to this channel and also join the notification squad by hitting the bell button to make sure you grow your Flutter skills, because here on ResoCoder, I am determined to provide you with the best tutorials and resources so that you will become an in-demand Flutter developer. And if you are serious about becoming a great Flutter developer who can build real apps for clients or at a job, go to flutter.education. Link is also in the video description, by the way, to get the top curated Flutter news and resources aimed at improving your app development career. Over there, you can also subscribe to my mailing list to get the best Flutter resources delivered weekly right into your inbox. Now, if this video helped you, give it a like and also share it with other developers who are surely going to find this beneficial as well. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and see you in the next video.